My name is Serena Hughes. I am 31 years old, and on a freezing Tuesday morning in January, my mother-in-law stood next to me in an executive elevator, adjusting her imitation pearls. She was smiling because she believed she was riding this car to the top floor to watch building security escort me out to the street. She thought today was the day I got fired from what she called my little typing hobby. Beside her, my husband Evan stared at the floor indicator lights, his jaw tight, looking like a man ready to put his wife in her proper place. They did not know my name was already etched into the frosted glass doors waiting at the end of this ride. Before I tell you what happened when those elevator doors finally opened, please take a moment to like and subscribe to QT Told Stories and drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from right now. I always read your comments. Let me take you back to how my marriage actually ended. The fracture did not start with broken plates or a screaming match in the driveway. It started over a dry roast at a Sunday family dinner in our Pennsylvania suburb. My mother-in-law, Patricia, set her fork down on the good china, looked across the dining table, and announced it was time I gave up my fake job. She stated, with the casual authority of a judge handing down a sentence, that a good wife stays home, tends to the house, and supports her husband and his real career. I did not answer her. I shifted my gaze to Evan. He sat beside me holding a bottle of craft beer. He did not blink. He took a slow sip, set the bottle down on a coaster, and gave his mother a single confirming nod. He did not defend me. He did not say a word. To them, I was a nuisance. The reality of my life, the one I kept carefully insulated from my husband and his family, is that I operate a digital logistics firm clearing 7 figures annually. But they did not see a chief executive officer. 10 years ago, when Evan and I first met, I was operating out of a damp basement apartment, coding supply chain software on a second-hand laptop and living off instant noodles. Patricia and my father-in-law, Howard, burned that image of the struggling charity case into their minds. It was a narrative that suited their dynamic. They needed someone to look down on, and Evan needed to be the provider, the king of his small castle. That single nod at the dinner table shifted the tectonic plates of my life. I did not argue. I did not defend my work. I just smiled, folded my linen napkin, and realized I was sleeping next to a liability. The naive girl in the basement was long gone, but the cage they were trying to build for her remained. Evan cleared his throat and told me I needed to step back and start babysitting his sister Monica and her children during the week, since my time was not bringing in real money. I nodded slowly. I told him I would look into transitioning my schedule. I did not tell him I was transitioning my schedule to meet with my corporate attorney. You are probably wondering how a wife hides a 7-figure company from the man she shares a bed with. The answer is not complicated. It requires no secret safes or hidden briefcases in the floorboards. It only requires a husband whose arrogance is larger than his curiosity. The foundation of my secret was built on the tax illusion. 7 years ago, right after we got married, Evan sat me down at the kitchen counter. He had a stack of financial documents spread out in front of him. He carried $90,000 in student loan debt from a private university, a degree that barely earned him a middle management position at a paper supply firm. He told me we would be filing our taxes separately, married filing separately. He used a tone that suggested he was doing me a tremendous favor. He said he needed to protect my meager income from his debt obligations. He claimed it was a strategic move to keep our finances segregated so my credit score would not be dragged down by his monthly loan payments. It was a manipulative tactic designed to ensure he maintained full control over his own money while dictating how I spent mine. But I took that tactic and I weaponized it. Because we filed separately, he never saw my W-2 forms. He never saw my corporate K-1 schedules. He never looked at the tax returns filed under my business entity. I hired a private accountant in downtown Philadelphia who routed all correspondence to a secure post office box. Evan assumed I was bringing in maybe $30,000 a year as an hourly contractor. He liked it that way. It made him feel tall. It made him feel like the undisputed head of the household. My firm is called Viridian Strategies. I built it from the ground up to be entirely remote and asynchronous. Long before the rest of the corporate world transitioned to home offices, I was managing a decentralized network of logistics coordinators across 3 different time zones. My physical location did not matter to my high-end clients. It only mattered that their commercial freight arrived on schedule. I could run high-level board meetings from the spare bedroom in our house behind a locked door. Evan assumed I was doing low-wage data entry. He thought I spent my days typing numbers into endless spreadsheets for a nameless supervisor. I let him believe it. Let me paint a picture of our daily routine to show you how easy it was. I would sit at my desk wearing a tailored blazer over comfortable leggings. On my primary monitor, I would be reviewing a $3 million vendor contract. I would have my microphone muted. In the hallway outside my solid oak door, Evan would be pacing in his sweatpants, loudly complaining on his phone to customer service about our internet bill. He never knocked. He never asked how my day was going or what specific projects I was handling. He just wanted to know if dinner would be ready by 6. He needed to be the sole provider. He needed to be the king of his small castle. I allowed him to wear the crown because it kept him blind to the empire I was building right down the hall. The first major boulder of conflict crashed into my living room on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was sitting on the sofa, reviewing quarterly projections on my tablet. Evan walked into the room, turned off the television without asking, and stood directly between me and the screen. He did not request a moment of my time. He formally instructed me to cut my working hours by half. His sister Monica had recently decided to return to her corporate marketing job on a part-time basis. Monica had 3 young children, and private childcare in our county was notoriously expensive. Evan told me it only made sense for me to step in and babysit his nieces and nephews for free during the work week. I set my tablet face down on the glass coffee table. I asked him to explain his reasoning. He let out a short, patronizing sigh, the kind you give a child who does not understand basic math. He said Monica had a real career with actual upward mobility. He told me my time was financially worthless compared to hers. He actually used those exact words. He said my little typing gig was barely covering the grocery bill, so I needed to contribute to the family in a more practical way. He told me to email my boss in the morning and request a permanent schedule reduction. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or try to defend the value of my time or my labor. Anger is sloppy and unpredictable. Silence is precise. I just smiled at him. I logged the sheer disrespect like a bookkeeper logs an unpaid invoice. I told him I would look into transitioning my schedule. I watched his shoulders relax. I watched him smile back satisfied that he had successfully managed his household and put his wife in her place. He turned around and walked into the kitchen to pour himself a bourbon. He thought I was going to transition my schedule to change diapers and heat up bottles for his sister. I was actually transitioning my schedule to meet with my corporate attorney. The naive girl he met a decade ago would have cried. She would have begged for validation from the man she loved. She would have printed out bank statements to prove her worth to him and his family. But I was not that girl anymore. His demand to turn me into unpaid domestic labor was the exact catalyst I needed to initiate a bulletproof exit strategy. The next morning, after Evan left for his mediocre office job, I drove into downtown Philadelphia. I did not drive the sensible used sedan Evan insisted we buy to save money. I called an executive car service. I sat in the back seat and watched the suburban trees give way to the towering glass and steel of the city skyline. My attorney is a man named Oliver. His office sits on the 40th floor of a high-rise in the financial district. The waiting room smells like cedar and old money. Oliver is the only person on earth who knows exactly what my business is worth, down to the final decimal point. I sat in a heavy leather chair across from his mahogany desk. I told Oliver I needed to build a fortress. I needed to insulate every single asset I owned from the man I was married to. Pennsylvania marital property laws are complicated, But Evan had already handed me the key to my own protection, because he had insisted on keeping our finances legally segregated for the entirety of our marriage to protect his own assets. Establishing a clear division of wealth was a straightforward process. Oliver drafted the thick stack of paperwork to create a holding company. We named it Hughes Holdings LLC. I began the quiet, meticulous process of transferring my shares, my revenue streams, and my intellectual property into an untouchable corporate structure. I spent 3 hours in that law office signing documents. Every stroke of the pen felt like laying a heavy brick in a wall between Evan and my future. When I finished, Oliver handed me a copy of the Articles of Incorporation. He asked me if my husband had any idea what was happening behind the scenes. I told him my husband thought I was at home researching recipes for a pot roast and clearing my schedule for babysitting duty. Oliver just nodded and filed the papers away. I took the train back to the suburbs. I walked through the front door of my house at 3 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. It looked exactly the same as I had left it that morning. The throw pillows were perfectly arranged. The mail was sitting on the console table. But the power dynamic had shifted permanently. I no longer viewed this place as my home. I viewed it as a temporary waiting room. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a tall glass of ice water. My phone buzzed on the granite counter. It was a text message from Evan. He asked if I had emailed my boss yet about cutting my hours for Monica. I typed my reply with steady fingers. I told him I was handling the paperwork today and making major adjustments. It was the truest thing I had ever said to him. But Evan and Monica were not the only ones plotting to manage my time and my identity. Just as I set my phone down, the deadbolt on the front door clicked open. Evan had given his mother a spare key 2 years ago for emergencies. Patricia did not believe in emergencies. She believed in unannounced inspections. I heard her heavy footsteps in the foyer. The true invasion of my physical space was just beginning, and Patricia was about to push my patience to a dangerous breaking point. I heard the heavy thud of Patricia dropping her designer handbag on the entryway console downstairs. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the webcam of my laptop. 3 executives from a national medical supply distributor were tiled on my screen. We were in the final stages of negotiating a $5 million vendor agreement. This was not a casual catch-up. This was a highly technical discussion about supply chain redundancies, climate-controlled freight routing, and automated dispatch protocols. The men on the screen respected me because my firm delivered results with cold efficiency. They did not know I was sitting in a suburban spare bedroom in Pennsylvania. They only knew Veridian Strategies moved their sensitive cargo faster and safer than anyone else on the eastern seaboard. Then the noise started. Patricia did not knock. She did not call out a greeting to announce her arrival. She went straight to the hall closet and pulled out the heavy upright vacuum cleaner. I heard the thick power cord whip against the drywall. The motor roared to life right outside my office. It was a deafening, high-pitched whine that bled straight through the solid wood of my door. She was not just cleaning. She was sending a clear, undeniable message. She rammed the hard plastic vacuum head repeatedly against my baseboards. Thud, whir, thud. She scraped it along the bottom of my door, rattling the brass hinges in their frames. She wanted to disrupt my little project. She wanted to humiliate me into stepping out of my office and apologizing for ignoring my domestic duties. I reached out with a steady index finger and clicked the mute button on my screen. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the lead executive from Chicago. Anger is a sloppy emotion. It makes your hands shake. It makes your voice crack. It clouds your judgment. Silence is a surgical instrument. I sat there in my tailored blazer watching the brass doorknob rattle under Patricia's assault. I waited for a natural pause in the executive's sentence. I unmuted my microphone for exactly 4 seconds, delivered a concise counteroffer regarding their shipping margins, and muted myself again. I closed a $5 million contract while my mother-in-law tried to drown out my career with a household appliance. After the executives logged off and the screen went black, I closed my laptop. I unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway. Patricia abruptly switched off the vacuum. The sudden quiet was heavy ringing in my ears. She looked at me with wide artificial innocence, wiping a non-existent speck of dust from her silk blouse. She told me I had been cooped up in there all day playing on my computer. She said she figured someone needed to maintain a proper home, since I was clearly neglecting my responsibilities as a wife. I looked at her. I noted the rigid set of her shoulders and the tight lines around her mouth. Patricia belonged to a generation and a social circle where a woman derived her entire worth from the cleanliness of her living room and the title printed on her husband's business card. She had spent 30 years serving Howard, sacrificing any personal ambition to ensure his shirts were ironed and his dinners were hot. My independence, even the fake low-wage version she believed I possessed, was a direct insult to her entire worldview. If I could be happy and fulfilled working behind a closed door, then her lifelong submission was a waste. I did not explain my work. I did not tell her she had just vacuumed outside the door of a chief executive officer who secured enough revenue in 10 minutes to buy her house in cash. I simply thanked her for her effort, stepped around the tangled cord, and walked down the stairs to pour myself a cup of black coffee. She left shortly after, deeply disappointed that she had failed to elicit the tears or the argument she was hunting for. The physical sabotage from Patricia was only one layer of their coordinated campaign. The condescension came from all sides, wrapping around me like a net. That evening, Evan returned from his office. We sat down at the dining table for dinner. I had ordered takeout from a local bistro and transferred the food to actual ceramic plates, a small strategic compromise to keep the peace. As we ate in relative quiet, my phone chimed on the table. A notification appeared on the glass screen. It was a voicemail from Howard. I let it sit for a moment. Then, with Evan sitting right across from me, I picked up the device, pressed play, and put the phone on speaker. Howard has the voice of a man who spent 40 years in middle management and still wears a silk tie to the golf course. He speaks slowly, pronouncing every single syllable, entirely convinced he is the smartest person in any given zip code. The audio crackled through the small speaker. Howard cleared his throat. He said he was calling to give me some unsolicited financial advice. He proceeded to deliver a 3-minute lecture on basic tax brackets. He used small, simple words. He explained how income tax worked, assuming my data entry gig barely grossed minimum wage. He cautioned me against owing the Internal Revenue Service at the end of the year, suggesting I start setting aside a few pennies from every paycheck in a jar. He ended the message by instructing me to rely heavily on Evan's expertise, noting that Evan had a real head for numbers and could help me manage my meager earnings. I let the recording finish. The mechanical voice of the automated system announced the end of the message. The silence stretched across the dining table, thick and expectant. I looked at my husband. A supportive partner would have been embarrassed. A decent man would have immediately picked up his own phone, called his father, and demanded he stop patronizing his wife. Evan did neither of those things. Evan picked up his fork, poked at his roasted vegetables, and chuckled. It was a dry, amused sound. He looked at me across the table, his eyes filled with a terrifying blend of pity and unearned arrogance. He told me I should not take it personally. He said Howard just understood how the real world operated and was only trying to help me grasp the basics. Then Evan leaned back in his wooden chair, took a sip of his drink, and delivered a sentence that I will remember for the rest of my life. He smiled and said women just do not have the temperament to run real businesses. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather or the score of a baseball game. He honestly believed my brain was not wired for anything more complex than folding laundry and typing names into a spreadsheet. He thought I was fragile. He thought I was a domestic pet that needed to be trained and guided by a superior intellect. I stared at him. The man sitting across from me was not a partner. He was a warden who had convinced himself he was a king. He had just handed me the exact weapon I would eventually use to dismantle his ego, piece by piece. I did not cry, I did not argue the point or list my credentials. I picked up my phone, tapped the screen, and saved Howard's voicemail to a secure cloud folder. The evidence was stacking up in neat, undeniable rows. The trap was slowly being set, and they were all walking right into it with smiles on their faces. I finished my dinner in silence, chewing slowly, calculating my next move. I knew Evan's arrogance was a mask for his own deep insecurities. He needed me to be financially subordinate because his own career was stalling. I could sense a shift coming in his behavior, a desperate need to tighten his grip on my life before he lost control of his own professional trajectory. That shift arrived faster than I anticipated. 2 days later, Evan received a phone call from his regional director. I could hear the muffled conversation from the kitchen. His tone started hopeful and ended in a bitter, defensive monotone. He had been passed over for the promotion he had been chasing for 3 years. The position went to a younger external candidate. When he hung up the phone, the energy in the house turned toxic. His bruised ego was a dangerous thing, and it needed an immediate target. He could not punish his corporate superiors, so he turned his sights on the only person he believed he had unquestioned authority over. He walked into the kitchen, his face flushed red, and told me we needed to sit down and have a serious discussion about my money. He was about to demand a joint bank account, setting off a chain reaction that would eventually burn his entire reality to the ground. Evan stood in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the polished hardwood floor. His necktie was pulled loose, hanging unevenly against his wrinkled collar. His face carried the tight, pinched look of a man who had just been handed his own mediocrity. He worked in regional sales for a mid-sized paper supply distributor. It was a stagnant industry, built on shrinking margins and aging clientele. He had staked his entire identity on securing a promotion to regional director. The promotion came with a marginal pay increase, but more importantly, it came with a title. Evan lived for titles. He lived for the superficial markers of success. When his phone call ended and he learned the position had gone to a 28-year-old external hire, his brittle pride shattered into jagged pieces. A man with a healthy ego would reflect on his shortcomings or update his resume. Evan was not a healthy man. He operated on a zero-sum philosophy. If he felt small in the corporate world, he needed to make someone else feel even smaller in his private world. I watched him cross the kitchen. He did not go to the refrigerator. He did not pour a drink to soothe his nerves. He walked directly to his leather briefcase, resting on the hall table, snapped the brass latches open, and pulled out a stack of printed paper. He approached the kitchen island. I was sitting on a high stool sipping my ice water, watching him move with a stiff, calculated energy. He slapped the papers down onto the granite counter. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. It was a standard application for a joint checking and savings account at his local credit union. He smoothed the pages flat with his palms, leaned over the counter, and fixed his eyes on me. His tone was devoid of warmth. It was the tone of a frustrated manager addressing an underperforming subordinate. He informed me that our current financial arrangement was no longer sustainable. He said my spending habits were unmonitored and erratic. He claimed that because I did not understand how a real household budget operated, he needed to assume full control of all incoming revenue. He pointed a rigid finger at the signature line on the application. He demanded I deposit my future paychecks directly into this new account. In exchange, he would put me on a strict monthly allowance for groceries and personal items. He told me I was wasting money on frivolous online purchases and failing to contribute to our long-term goals. He said putting him in charge was the only logical way to manage my meager earnings and prevent me from dragging down his financial future. I looked down at the black ink on the crisp white paper. I traced the edge of the document with my fingernail. This was the exact moment the final illusion of my marriage evaporated. This was not a partnership struggling through a rough patch. It was a trap. It had always been a trap. He did not want a wife to build a life with. He wanted a dependent. He wanted a captive audience to witness his fabricated superiority. He needed me to be poor, reliant, and grateful for whatever scraps of autonomy he decided to toss my way. The affection I once held for the man standing across the counter dissolved, replaced by a cold, tactical clarity. I did not throw the ice water in his face. I did not tear the application in half or raise my voice. I reached into the ceramic cup holding our pens, pulled out a smooth ballpoint, and clicked the top. I met his gaze. I let my shoulders drop, mimicking the posture of a defeated woman resigning herself to her fate. I told him he was right. I told him I was terrible with numbers and would appreciate his guidance. I lowered my head, pressed the pen to the paper, and signed my name on the dotted line in fluid cursive. If you have ever smiled at a person while meticulously planning their total financial ruin, you know the exact adrenaline that spiked through my veins in that kitchen. The sheer thrill of holding a devastating secret behind a submissive smile is intoxicating. Hit subscribe if you have been there, and let me know in the comments how long you waited to spring your trap. I handed the signed document back to him. He snatched it off the counter, his chest puffed out, his ego instantly repaired by my manufactured surrender. He walked away to secure the paperwork in his briefcase, his posture straight and victorious. While his back was turned, I pulled out my phone and logged into the secure banking portal for Viridian Strategies. I navigated to the corporate payroll section. I created a new automated clearinghouse protocol. I set up a recurring monthly transfer of $4,000, routing it directly into the new joint account Evan was opening. To a man who earned a stagnant mid-level salary, $4,000 a month looked like the maximum net income a remote data entry worker could possibly generate. To me, it was a negligible rounding error. It was the cost of doing business. It was the price of keeping my warden asleep while I picked the locks on the prison doors. The decoy account worked flawlessly. The following Friday, the first $4,000 deposit cleared the system. Evan checked the balance on his phone while sitting on the living room sofa. A wide, smug grin spread across his face. He felt like the ultimate master of his domain. He had successfully corralled his wife and seized her assets. He became entirely complacent. Over the next few weeks, he stopped asking about my schedule. He stopped questioning my hours behind the locked office door. He believed he already owned everything I produced, so the details no longer mattered to him. He began treating my decoy stipend as his personal slush fund. He leased a brand new luxury sedan he did not need, justifying the heavy expense as a reward for his hard work. He purchased a set of custom golf clubs, swiping the debit card linked to our joint account without asking my opinion. I watched the notification alerts pop up on my phone, tracking his constant purchases. Every swipe of that card was another nail in his coffin. He was building his new lavish lifestyle on a foundation made of sand, completely unaware of the real financial maneuvers happening in the shadows. While he bought golf clubs, I was meeting with commercial real estate brokers to secure a 10,000 square foot office building in the heart of the city. But the quiet complacency inside our home was not destined to last. Evan was satisfied, but his family required constant validation. They fed on comparison. They needed a fresh reason to look down on me, and the universe provided them with the perfect opportunity. His sister Monica worked as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising agency. 2 weeks after I signed the bank application, Monica received a minor title bump. She was shifted from a junior coordinator to a standard account manager. It was a trivial promotion that came with a new batch of business cards and a nominal salary increase. But to Patricia, it was the equivalent of a presidential inauguration. It was the ultimate proof that her daughter was a soaring corporate success, while her daughter-in-law was a stagnant failure. Patricia immediately took charge. She sent out a formal digital invitation to the entire extended family. She was throwing a catered dinner at her house to celebrate Monica stepping into a leadership role. When the invitation arrived in my inbox, it included a passive-aggressive note pinned to the bottom. Patricia wrote that she hoped I could attend, as it would be an excellent opportunity for me to observe what a successful career trajectory looked like. She noted that perhaps Monica could give me some pointers on how to advance beyond my little home projects. I accepted the invitation. I bought a tasteful, expensive dress. I prepared to walk into a dining room filled with people who were eagerly waiting to mock my lack of progress. They wanted to use Monica's minor victory to crush my spirit. They had no idea they were inviting a chief executive officer to their suburban pageant. I was ready to face the firing squad, but what I discovered on Evan's unlocked phone during that dinner would escalate this silent war into a documented conspiracy. While the digital invitation to celebrate my sister-in-law and her trivial corporate promotion sat waiting in my inbox, my husband spent his evenings micromanaging my decoy stipend. He treated that $4,000 monthly deposit like a victorious general dividing the spoils of war. I watched him sit at the kitchen island, tapping the illuminated screen of his phone, categorizing my supposed income into strict budgeting applications. He allocated $100 a month for my personal expenses, treating it like a generous allowance given to a teenager. He diverted the rest to cover the heavy lease on his new luxury sedan and his premium golf club memberships. He wore a constant, self-satisfied smirk. He firmly believed he had captured my earning potential and secured his position as the financial patriarch of our home. His arrogance blinded him to the reality unfolding right beneath his nose. He never noticed my frequent trips out of the house during standard business hours. He never questioned the rising mileage on my vehicle. He was too focused on counting pennies to see the vault being emptied out from under him. On a crisp Thursday morning, while Evan was sitting in a meaningless regional sales meeting, listening to lectures about paper supply quotas, I drove my sensible used sedan toward downtown Philadelphia. The highway slipped past my windows, trading manicured suburban lawns for towering structures of steel and reflective glass. The radio played a low, steady instrumental track. The heater fought off the autumn chill. I parked in a subterranean garage beneath a premium commercial high-rise, a building where the monthly rent for a single floor exceeded Evan's yearly salary. I rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 42nd floor. The polished brass doors opened into the reception area of my corporate law firm. This was the domain of my primary attorney, Oliver. Oliver is a 60-year-old veteran of corporate restructuring. He possesses the sharp, analytical mind of a chess grandmaster and the refined demeanor of a career diplomat. He wears bespoke charcoal suits and keeps his silver hair neatly parted. He respects me, not because I am a woman trying to prove a point to her family, but because my company generates undeniable seven-figure revenue. I walked into his corner office. The sensory details of that room always grounded me, offering a stark contrast to the petty domestic squabbles waiting at home. The air smelled of aged leather chairs and expensive espresso. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the intricate grain of his heavy oak desk. Oliver did not offer patronizing advice about household budgets. He stood up, extended his hand, and greeted me by my formal title. He treated me like a titan of industry. We sat down across from each other to execute the flawless legal maneuver I had set in motion weeks prior. He offered me a glass of sparkling water on a silver tray, then opened a thick, embossed folder. Inside lay the foundational documents for Hughes Holdings Limited Liability Company. We were not merely opening a new bank account. We were constructing an impenetrable corporate fortress. I was quietly transferring every physical asset, every digital share, and every dollar of profit from Viridian Strategies into this new, untouchable structure. The beauty of this strategy relied entirely on the trap Evan had built for himself years ago. During our first year of marriage, Evan insisted we maintain strictly segregated finances. He drafted a post-nuptial agreement designed to protect his own future earnings and shield him from any potential liabilities tied to my struggling startup. Pennsylvania law honors those clear boundaries when they are legally documented and consistently maintained. Because Evan demanded that separation early on, my business remained my sole and separate property. By shifting Viridian strategies under the umbrella of Hughes Holdings, I was severing any tenuous legal thread Evan might try to pull during a future divorce proceeding. He could not touch the holding company. He could not claim a percentage of the valuation. He could not demand a payout from the revenue streams. He had locked himself out of the castle long before it was even built. Oliver handed me his heavy Mont Blanc pen. The sharp, deliberate click of the cap being removed echoed in the quiet office. I signed my name 14 times. I initialed 22 separate clauses. The ink flowed smooth and dark across the premium paper. I reviewed the tax implications of the transfer, verifying the efficiency of our strategy. With every stroke of that pen, I insulated my empire. I locked away the wealth I had built with my own hands. When I handed the instrument back, Oliver reviewed the signatures, closed the heavy folder, and gave me a single confirming nod. The shield was up. The company was secure. I left the city feeling an undeniable sense of invulnerability. I navigated the afternoon traffic, watching the Philadelphia skyline fade in my rear-view mirror. I pulled into my driveway, the tires crunching softly against the gravel. The house looked like a picturesque suburban dream, with its neat shutters and trimmed hedges, but to me, it was merely a temporary movie set waiting to be struck. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The air inside felt stale. I walked toward the kitchen to pour a glass of water, and that is when I noticed the disruption. The throw pillows on the sofa were rearranged. A stack of mail I had left on the console table was shifted 2 inches to the left. Someone had been inside my home while I was securing my fortune. I found the evidence resting on the center island. It was a pale yellow sticky note written in Patricia's distinctive looping cursive. She had used the spare key Evan gave her to drop by unannounced for another spontaneous inspection. The note was a masterpiece of condescending critique. She wrote that she noticed a thick layer of dust accumulating on the dining room baseboards. She mentioned the exact brand of lemon-scented wood polish she preferred. She suggested I spend less time playing on my computer and more time taking pride in my domestic environment, noting that a clean house reflects a clear mind. She ended the message with a small smiley face drawn in blue ink. She was inspecting my living quarters like a warden pacing a cell block. She walked through my private halls, judging the cleanliness of my floors, entirely oblivious to the reality of the situation. She was standing inside the home of a woman who possessed the liquid capital to purchase her entire neighborhood twice over in cash. The irony tasted metallic and sharp on my tongue. I did not crumple the yellow paper. I did not throw it in the kitchen trash can. I peeled it off the granite surface and placed it carefully inside my leather briefcase, sliding it right next to my copy of the newly signed corporate incorporation documents. I kept her petty insult pressed directly against the proof of my financial supremacy. It was a perfect physical representation of the 2 worlds I was currently straddling. The legal paperwork was finalized. The fortress was secure. I had nothing left to protect, which meant I no longer had to play defense. Now it was time to go on the offensive. I walked upstairs to my closet to select a tasteful, expensive dress for the evening. I had to attend the celebratory dinner for Monica and her trivial marketing promotion. I was preparing to walk into a dining room filled with people eagerly waiting to mock my stagnant career and offer me unsolicited life advice. But armed with my new corporate shield, I felt no fear. I was ready to face the firing squad, knowing that tonight I would uncover a devastating secret hiding in plain sight on Evan's phone. A secret that would shift this silent war into a documented conspiracy. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, smoothing the fabric of the dark navy dress I had chosen for the evening. The fabric was heavy and expensive, tailored to project quiet authority. In 2 hours, Evan and I were scheduled to arrive at Patricia's house for the celebratory dinner honoring his sister. I was mentally preparing to navigate a dining room filled with relatives who viewed me as an underachieving disappointment. I needed to maintain a serene expression while they toasted Monica and her new marketing title. While I was adjusting my collar, the smart bulbs in the bedroom flickered. The digital clock on the nightstand flashed, indicating a sudden drop in the local network connection. A notification popped up on my cellular device, warning me that the main router had lost internet access. For a normal household, a brief outage is a minor inconvenience. For the Chief Executive Officer of Viridian Strategies, a severed connection is a critical operational failure. I needed to send one final encrypted email to Oliver regarding the holding company before leaving for the dinner. I walked out of the bedroom and headed toward the staircase. The house was quiet, except for the sound of running water echoing from the master bathroom. Evan was in the shower, taking his time getting ready for his family gathering. I walked down to the kitchen where the primary fiber optic modem was located. I intended to reboot the hardware and check the diagnostic logs to ensure our internet service provider was not throttling the bandwidth. I picked up Evan's tablet from the granite island. He often used it to control the smart home features, so it was already authenticated on the local administrator network. I tapped the screen to wake the device. He had not enabled the security passcode. He was a man who believed his privacy was an inherent right, assuming no one in his own home would ever dare question his activities. I opened the browser to access the router configuration portal. I planned to reset the dynamic internet protocol address, but when the browser application launched, it did not open to a blank search page. It refreshed a series of tabs Evan had left active earlier that afternoon. The screen illuminated the dim kitchen with a harsh white glow. I found myself staring directly at a high-yield savings account portal under Evan's name. The balance was staggering. It was staggering because it was zero. My eyes darted to the top corner of the screen to verify the name on the account. It was his primary individual vault, the one he had fiercely protected during our post-nuptial negotiations years ago. He used to boast about the robust safety net he was building. Now, the digital ledger showed a total depletion of funds. I tapped the adjacent browser tab. A monthly statement from a premium credit card company materialized. The primary cardholder listed was Monica. My sister-in-law, the supposed corporate rising star, carried a revolving debt load of $38,000 on a single card. I scrolled down the transaction history with a steady finger. The line items painted a clear picture of a lavish, unfunded lifestyle. There were charges for designer handbags, luxury weekend resorts, and expensive dinners at exclusive city restaurants. Monica was living far beyond her nominal marketing salary, funding her existence with borrowed money. I looked at the payment history section. The puzzle pieces snapped together with cold, undeniable precision. The funding source, paying down Monica's exorbitant minimum balances, was an external checking account routing number. I recognized those digits immediately. It was Evan's personal checking account. He was draining his own liquid assets to bail out his sister. He was funding her fabricated success story. The psychology behind his actions crystallized in my mind. Patricia and Howard idolized Monica. They viewed her as the golden child, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong. Evan lived in the shadow of their unrelenting favoritism. He craved their approval like a starving man craves bread. By secretly acting as Monica's financial savior, he purchased a twisted sense of importance. He got to play the wealthy, successful older brother, rescuing the family princess from her own reckless choices. He bought his ego with cash he did not actually possess. But playing the hero had bankrupted him. His own accounts were bled dry. I opened a third tab, finding the dashboard for the new joint checking account he had forced me to sign up for just weeks prior. The narrative he had sold me was a calculated lie. He had stood in this exact kitchen, wearing a mask of patriarchal authority, demanding I hand over my paychecks because I was too irresponsible to manage a budget. He told me he needed to put me on a strict allowance to protect our financial future. The truth staring back at me from the tablet screen was much darker. He did not want to control my spending. He needed my money to survive. The ledger for our joint account showed my automated $4,000 deposit clearing the system. 48 hours later, an outbound transfer for $3,800 was scheduled. The recipient of that transfer was the mortgage lender for our house. Evan could no longer afford the monthly payment on his own home. His mediocre corporate salary was entirely consumed by his car lease, his golf memberships, and his secret debt payments to his sister. He was financially drowning. He had orchestrated the entire joint account scheme to capture my income and use it as a life raft. He was using the money he mocked as a low-wage typing gig to keep a roof over his own head. He was not a misguided traditionalist trying to lead a household. He was a parasite. He was stealing from his wife to fund his sister's designer wardrobe, all while allowing his parents to treat me like a worthless servant. The pacing of my revenge accelerated in that exact moment. Any lingering affection, any residual loyalty I held for the man upstairs in the shower evaporated into the cold kitchen air. It was a clean, instantaneous death of a marriage. I did not feel betrayed. I felt liberated. The guilt of hiding my corporate empire vanished. He was a hostile liability. If I had not insulated Viridian Strategies, with Oliver Evan would have undoubtedly leveraged my actual wealth to pay off every cent of his family's obligations. He would have drained my company to buy his mother's affection. I pulled my own cellular phone from my pocket. I opened the camera application and meticulously photographed every single screen on his tablet. I captured the zeroed-out savings account. I captured Monica's credit card statements. I captured the outbound mortgage transfer funded by my exact deposit. I verified the timestamps and the account numbers in the frame. I uploaded the entire gallery of evidence to the encrypted cloud vault managed by my attorney. Have you ever discovered a secret that instantly killed any remaining love you had? Have you ever looked at a person and realized the version of them you trusted was merely a poorly constructed illusion? That is what this was. The man I married did not exist. In his place was a desperate, insolvent fraud. I closed the browser tabs, cleared the local history, and tapped the router configuration application. I reset the dynamic protocol, restoring the internet connection to the house. I set his tablet back on the granite counter, positioning it exactly as I had found it. I heard the water shut off on the second floor. Evan's heavy footsteps echoed above me as he walked into the master bedroom to dress for the party. He had no idea his entire hidden reality was now documented and secured in a legal fortress. He thought he was walking into a celebratory evening as the master of his domain. I walked back up the stairs. I needed to finish my own preparations. I applied a subtle shade of lipstick. I clasped a delicate silver watch around my wrist. I looked at my reflection one last time. I was no longer a wife attending a family obligation. I was an executive observing a failing competitor. 20 minutes later, Evan descended the staircase wearing a crisp button-down shirt and a tailored sport coat. He looked confident. He looked like a man who believed his secrets were safe. He tossed his car keys in his hand and smiled at me. He told me we needed to leave immediately so we would not be late to honor Monica. He reminded me to smile and be gracious, noting that his parents had gone to great lengths to arrange the catering. I picked up my leather purse. I looked at the man whose mortgage I had just paid. I offered him a calm, polite nod. I told him I was looking forward to the evening. We walked out to his leased luxury sedan, the vehicle he could not afford, and began the drive to Patricia's house. The stage was set. The dining room table was waiting. We were driving straight into the family ambush, and I possessed all the ammunition I would ever need. The drive to Patricia and Howard's colonial-style home took 20 minutes. The tires of Evan's leased sedan crunched over the pristine gravel of their circular driveway. The property was illuminated by landscape lighting that cast long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawn. Walking up to the front door, I could already smell the heavy aroma of roasted lamb and rosemary seeping through the expensive mahogany wood. Patricia had hired a private catering company for the evening. 2 waiters in crisp white shirts and black aprons moved silently through the foyer, carrying trays of sparkling wine and delicate appetizers. All of this elaborate theater was orchestrated to celebrate Monica. She was standing in the center of the living room, holding a crystal flute, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins, who were looking at her like she had just cured a rare disease. Monica was 3 years older than Evan. She had spent the last half-decade floating through various mid-tier marketing roles, primarily coordinating social media calendars and ordering promotional merchandise for corporate retreats. Her recent promotion shifted her from a junior coordinator to an account manager. It was a standard routine progression that most professionals achieve within their first 2 years in the industry. But in this family, her minor title bump was treated like a historic triumph. I handed my coat to a catering assistant and accepted a glass of mineral water. I observed the room with the detached fascination of a scientist watching an ant farm. Evan immediately gravitated toward his sister, patting her on the back and laughing loudly at a joke someone else made. He was basking in her reflected glory, desperate to associate himself with any form of perceived success since his own career was flatlining. I stood near the perimeter of the room, sipping my water, waiting for the inevitable moment when their celebration of Monica would pivot into an interrogation of me. Patricia directed everyone into the formal dining room. The long table was set with heirloom silver and fine china. Tall taper candles flickered in the center, casting a warm glow over the carefully arranged floral centerpieces. I found my assigned seat near the far end of the table, positioned deliberately away from the guests of honor. The caterers served the first course, a rich butternut squash soup, followed by the main entree of herb-crusted lamb. The air in the room was thick, suffocating beneath the weight of their collective arrogance. As the waiters cleared the dinner plates and began pouring coffee, Patricia stood up at the head of the table. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it gently against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, clear ringing sound brought the quiet conversations to an immediate halt. She smoothed the front of her silk dress and beamed at her daughter. Patricia began her toast by praising Monica for her dedication and her fierce independence. She delivered a lengthy, practiced speech about female empowerment, noting how proud she was to see a woman in their family shattering the corporate glass ceiling. The irony was so potent, it was almost tangible. She was praising a woman for doing basic administrative marketing tasks, entirely unaware that the woman sitting quietly at the end of her table was the chief executive officer of a logistics empire. Then came the pivot. Patricia could never just celebrate one person without tearing down another. It was a fundamental requirement of her personality. She let her gaze drift down the length of the table until her eyes locked directly onto mine. The warm, maternal smile vanished from her face, replaced by a tight, pitying grimace. She lowered her voice, adopting a tone of profound, manufactured sadness. She told the room it was a shame that not every woman understood the value of hard work and ambition. She pointed a manicured finger in my direction. She stated in front of 20 extended relatives that it broke her heart to see me wasting my life as a mere data entry assistant. She wondered aloud why I refused to contribute meaningfully to my household, suggesting that my stubborn insistence on keeping a fake, low-wage job was an unfair burden on her hard-working son. The dining room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. It was a coordinated public ambush designed to break my spirit and force me into submission through sheer humiliation. They expected me to flush red. They expected me to lower my head in shame or stammer out a weak defense of my fictional typing gig. I did none of those things. I picked up my linen napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and smiled at her. It was a calm, unbothered smile. I did not offer a single word of rebuttal. I let her insult hang in the quiet air, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. Evan sat 2 seats away from me. He stared down at his coffee cup, swirling the dark liquid, tacitly endorsing his mother's cruelty with his silence. The uncomfortable tension eventually broke, as Howard loudly suggested they move to the living room for dessert and after-dinner drinks. The guests stood up, the scrape of wooden chairs against the floor, providing a welcome distraction. I offered to help the catering staff clear the remaining glassware from the table. I needed a moment away from the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. I gathered a stack of water goblets and carried them through the swinging door into the kitchen. The kitchen was bright and chaotic, filled with the clatter of silverware and the smell of industrial dish soap. The caterers were busy near the industrial sinks, paying no attention to me. I set the glasses on the counter and turned to wash my hands. That is when I saw it. Evan had come into the kitchen moments earlier to retrieve a specific bottle of bourbon for his uncle. In his haste to return to the party, he had left his cellular phone resting face up on the cool marble of the center island. I was drying my hands with a paper towel when the phone screen suddenly illuminated. A push notification appeared bright and crisp against the dark background. The notification originated from a group messaging thread titled Family First. I stepped closer to the marble island. My eyes scanned the preview text displayed on the locked screen. The message was sent by Patricia. It was sent mere seconds after she had finished her speech in the dining room while her guests were walking down the hall. The text read verbatim, "Once we break her stubborn streak, she will quit and take care of Monica's kids." I stood frozen in the bright kitchen. The air left my lungs, not from shock, but from the breathtaking audacity of their scheme. This was not just a case of a demanding mother-in-law harboring a personal dislike for me. This was a documented, active conspiracy. They were not merely insulting my career choices. They were actively plotting a psychological siege. They intended to relentlessly humiliate me until my self-esteem eroded into dust, forcing me to resign from my supposed low-wage job so they could draft me into unpaid domestic servitude. They wanted a free nanny for their golden child, and they had chosen me as their victim. I did not hesitate. I picked up his phone. I walked swiftly out of the kitchen, slipping down the narrow side hallway and stepping into the guest powder room. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The small bathroom was quiet, smelling of expensive floral hand soap. I pulled my own phone from my purse. I held Evan's device in my left hand, the screen still glowing with the incriminating text message. I opened my camera application and snapped 3 high-resolution photographs of his screen. I captured the group chat title. I captured the sender's name. I captured the exact wording of their vicious plan. I reviewed the images to ensure the text was perfectly legible, then securely uploaded the files to my encrypted legal vault. This was the real gold. This was the undeniable proof of their intent. They thought they were playing a game of emotional manipulation, but I was playing a game of documented facts. I unlocked the powder room door, walked back down the hallway, and placed his phone exactly where I had found it on the marble island. I returned to the living room where the family was gathered around the fireplace. The caterers were passing out small plates of chocolate torte. I walked over to the dessert tray, selected a piece of cake, and found a quiet seat near the window. I ate my dessert slowly. I looked at Patricia, laughing with her sister. I looked at Evan, sipping his bourbon, pretending to be a wealthy patriarch. I looked at Monica, soaking up the unearned adoration of the room. I sat there with a serene, genuine smile on my face. They thought they had successfully humiliated me. They had no idea they had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy them. I knew their entire fabricated reality was on the verge of a catastrophic collapse. But Patricia was not content to leave her campaign in the realm of speeches and secret text messages. She needed to push the boundary further. She needed to put physical pressure on me to force my resignation. The following morning, the silent war escalated from the dining room table to my digital inbox, as Patricia decided to send me an email that would set the stage for the ultimate confrontation. The morning after the dinner party, the silent war evolved from spoken insults into documented harassment. I was sitting at my desk with a cup of hot tea, reviewing supply chain logistics for a new client based out of Seattle. The digital chime of my inbox echoed in the quiet room. A new message materialized on my screen. The sender was Patricia. She had copied Evan on the thread, ensuring her son was a direct witness to her latest maneuver. The subject line was a single word: opportunities. I clicked open the message. It contained a hyperlink to a local community job board. Patricia had routed me to a listing for a front desk receptionist at a suburban dental clinic located 3 miles from our house. The position offered minimum wage, requiring 20 hours a week answering phones and scheduling teeth cleanings. Below the web link, Patricia had typed a brief, corrosive note. She wrote that since my little project was clearly a dead end, this position would get me out of the house until I was ready to cook and clean full-time. I stared at the stark black text on the bright screen. The disrespect was breathtaking. She was no longer content to merely mock my fictional typing gig during family gatherings. She was actively dictating my employment. She was trying to force me into a low-wage entry-level position that would leave my schedule open enough to act as an unpaid nanny for Monica's children. She wanted me tethered to a receptionist desk, earning a trivial paycheck that Evan could easily sweep into his joint account to fund his secret debts. 30 minutes later, the door to my office swung open. Evan walked in holding his cellular device. He had read the email thread during his morning commute. A supportive husband would have been furious. A decent partner would have demanded his mother apologize for crossing a profound boundary. But Evan was a parasite, fighting for his financial survival. He leaned against the doorframe, refusing to make direct eye contact with me. He focused his gaze on the window blinds, adopting the patronizing tone of a frustrated life coach. He told me I needed to swallow my pride. He said his mother was only looking out for our best interests, and I should be grateful she was taking the time to help me find stable work. He launched into a lecture about the importance of building character through humble labor. He claimed a steady job at a dental office would provide me with a sense of routine, pulling me out of my fantasy world and forcing me to contribute to the real economy. He ended his speech by instructing me to fill out the digital application before he returned home from work that evening. I did not offer a rebuttal. I simply nodded, turning my attention back to my monitors. Evan mistook my silence for submission. He nodded back, satisfied with his display of authority, and left the house. But Patricia was not a woman who left things to chance. She did not trust me to follow a digital link. She required tangible, physical compliance. Later that afternoon, I returned home from a brief meeting in the city. I unlocked the front door, hung my coat in the hall closet, and walked upstairs to resume my work. When I stepped into my home office, I immediately noticed the disruption. The environment where I engineered 7-figure logistics contracts had been violated. Sitting square in the center of my ergonomic keyboard was a piece of cheap printer paper. Patricia had used her spare key again. She had let herself into my house, marched up the stairs, and invaded my sanctuary. She had printed the receptionist application from the dental clinic. She had taken the liberty of filling out my basic biographical information at the top of the form in her looping blue handwriting. She attached a bright pink sticky note to the center of the page. The note contained a single demanding instruction: sign this and drop it off today. This was the ultimate insult. This was the heavy boulder of disrespect crashing through the roof of my life. A woman running a multi-million-dollar logistics firm was being handed a minimum wage application by a mother-in-law whose greatest achievement was organizing a neighborhood bake sale. She had crossed a physical boundary entering my private workspace to leave a physical monument to her condescension. A weaker woman would have torn the application into pieces. An impulsive woman would have crumpled it into a ball, driven to Patricia's house, and thrown it in her face. But anger surrenders power. Strategy retains it. I picked up the crisp white paper. I studied the blue ink, analyzing the sheer audacity required to write those letters. Then I folded the document. I folded it neatly in half and then into precise thirds. I reached under my desk and pulled up my heavy leather briefcase. I unzipped the side compartment and slipped the folded application inside, resting it right next to the embossed folder containing the legal framework for Hughes Holdings. That folded piece of paper was a loaded weapon. It was Chekhov's gun. In theater, if you introduce a loaded rifle in the first act, it must be fired by the third. Every single detail has a purpose. I knew with unwavering certainty that I would use that exact piece of paper to deliver the final fatal blow to Patricia's ego. I just needed to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. I sat down in my leather executive chair. I woke my computer from sleep mode and opened the email application. I pulled up the original thread Patricia had sent that morning, the one copying my husband. I clicked the Reply All button. I did not write a lengthy defense of my career. I did not express outrage. I typed a single ambiguous sentence that would seal their fate. I wrote, "I will be making a major career transition in January." I hit send. The digital swoosh echoed in the quiet office. The response was swift and intoxicatingly misguided. Evan read the email while sitting at his desk at the paper supply company. He interpreted my tactical ambiguity as a total surrender. He believed I had folded under the pressure, accepted the receptionist position, and agreed to become the submissive, low-wage earner he desperately needed. He immediately called his mother to share the victorious news. That Friday evening, my in-laws invited themselves over to our house to commemorate the occasion. They did not ring the doorbell. Patricia used her spare key, ushering Howard and Monica through the front door. Evan greeted them in the foyer with a wide, triumphant grin. Patricia carried a bottle of cheap supermarket champagne. Howard carried a box of bakery cupcakes. They arranged their offerings on my kitchen island, pulling generic glass flutes from my cupboards. They were throwing a literal party in my own kitchen to celebrate my capitulation. They were drinking sparkling wine to honor the death of my ambition. Patricia popped the cork. The sharp sound bounced off the granite countertops. She poured the pale, bubbling liquid into the glasses and handed one to me. I accepted the flute, maintaining a pleasant, serene expression. Howard raised his glass high in the air. He delivered a toast to new beginnings, praising me for finally seeing reason and stepping out of my imaginary business world. He said there was no shame in honest, simple work, and he was proud of me for recognizing my limitations. Monica clinked her glass against mine, offering a patronizing smile, telling me I would love the simple routine of answering phones. Evan wrapped his arm around my waist, squeezing me tight, playing the role of the supportive patriarch guiding his flock. They drank their cheap champagne. They laughed loudly, their voices filling the kitchen with an abrasive, unearned confidence. They believed they had won the silent war. They thought they had successfully broken the stubborn girl from the basement and reshaped her into a manageable domestic tool. I stood there in the center of the kitchen holding the delicate glass flute. I brought the rim to my lips and took a small sip. The liquid tasted bitter and metallic. I looked at the four faces surrounding me. I studied their joyful, triumphant expressions. I did not feel a trace of anger. I felt an exhilarating rush of pure, focused anticipation. They were celebrating a surrender that never happened. They were raising a glass to a fiction they had written themselves. While they stood in my suburban kitchen intoxicated by their own fabricated superiority, I possessed the exact weapon I would use to fire back. And while they spent their weekend congratulating themselves on securing a minimum wage future for me, I was preparing to drive into the city on Monday morning to finalize a move that would dwarf their entire existence. Monday morning arrived with a biting chill in the air. Evan left the house at 7, carrying his briefcase and wearing a smug expression, firmly believing his wife was preparing to answer phones at a suburban dental clinic. I watched his leased sedan pull out of the driveway. Once his taillights disappeared around the corner, I called an executive car service. The ride into downtown Philadelphia provided a quiet space for reflection. The dramatic irony of my situation was thick, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Over the weekend, my in-laws had clinked cheap glass flutes celebrating the death of my ambition. They toasted what they perceived as my total surrender to a minimum wage existence. While the taste of their supermarket champagne still lingered in my kitchen, I was traveling to the financial district to execute an expansion that would dwarf their collective lifetime earnings. The vehicle pulled up to a towering skyscraper, clad in reflective glass and dark steel. I took the express elevator to the 45th floor, stepping into a sweeping conference room that overlooked the entire city. The space smelled of lemon polish and fresh espresso. 3 commercial real estate brokers, wearing bespoke suits, sat on the opposite side of a long mahogany table. They treated me with the utmost deference. They did not see a domestic servant or a struggling typist. They saw the chief executive officer of Viridian Strategies, a client preparing to anchor their premium corporate property. The lead broker slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the polished wood. Inside lay the commercial lease agreement. We were securing 10,000 square feet of prime real estate. It was an expansive, sunlit floor featuring custom glass enclosures, a dedicated boardroom, and private executive suites. The contract represented a 5-year commitment involving a 7-figure financial guarantee. I picked up the heavy pen provided by the broker. I felt the smooth, cold metal beneath my fingertips. I thought about the cheap printer paper Patricia had left on my keyboard. I thought about the dental receptionist application she had filled out in her looping blue handwriting. The contrast between her delusion and my reality was breathtaking. I signed my name on the dotted line, legally binding my firm to a multi-million-dollar footprint in the center of the city. I shook hands with the brokers, accepted the heavy brass keys to the executive suite, and rode the elevator back down to the street. The transition from corporate titan back to suburban captive required a seamless shift in demeanor. The very next evening, the quiet of my home was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. I opened it to find Howard standing on the porch. He wore a faded polo shirt and carried a worn leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He invited himself inside, claiming he was in the neighborhood and wanted to check on my progress. We sat in the living room. I offered him a cup of coffee, which he accepted without saying thank you. Howard spent 30 years working as a middle manager at a regional logistics firm. He was a man who derived his entire sense of self-worth from a modest pension and a lifetime of safely following orders. He settled into the armchair, crossed his legs, and unzipped his portfolio. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a cheap plastic calculator. He cleared his throat, adopting the tone of a weary professor addressing a slow student. He announced that since I was finally transitioning to a real job, he felt it was his duty to teach me basic budgeting. He noted that my previous data entry work clearly lacked any structured financial discipline. He leaned forward, tapping the plastic calculator with his index finger. He proceeded to brag about his own financial standing. He proudly detailed his $60,000 a year pension. He cited the figure several times, letting the number hang in the air, expecting me to be awestruck by his accumulated wealth. He told me that earning a pension requires decades of serious, unwavering commitment, something he believed my generation lacked. He explained that my new minimum wage role at the dental clinic would not yield much, so I needed to learn the value of a dollar. He offered to sit down with me every Sunday to review my pay stubs, ensuring I was allocating enough funds to household expenses rather than wasting my money on frivolous hobbies. I sat on the sofa directly across from him. I held my warm coffee mug between my hands. I looked at this man, analyzing the deep, unearned confidence radiating from his posture. He was attempting to teach me how to manage a meager hourly wage, utilizing a plastic calculator and a yellow notepad. He had no idea that my signature from the day prior carried more financial weight than his entire bloodline. He did not know I possessed the capital to buy the building he used to work in and fire his former supervisors just for the entertainment value. I did not feel a trace of anger. Anger requires a feeling of threat, and Howard posed no threat to me. I was fascinated by his arrogance. It was a profound psychological study in projection and insecurity. He needed me to be poor so he could feel rich. He needed me to be ignorant so he could feel wise. I let him finish his lengthy lecture on fiscal responsibility. I did not correct his assumptions. I did not mention the 10,000 square feet of premium glass and steel I now controlled. I offered him a calm, measured smile. I set my coffee mug on the coaster. "Thank you, Howard. I am learning a lot about value lately." The double meaning of my words sailed right over his head. He nodded, satisfied that his wisdom had been successfully imparted to a grateful subordinate. He packed his plastic calculator back into his worn portfolio, zipped it shut, and finished his coffee. But Howard had not come over just to deliver a lecture on personal finance. His visit had a secondary tactical purpose. He stood up from the armchair and stretched his back. Instead of walking toward the front door, he turned his attention to the staircase leading up to the second floor. He placed his hands on his hips and let his gaze wander upward toward the hallway where my home office was located. He casually mentioned that since I was taking this new receptionist job, my schedule was going to change. He noted that Evan had already volunteered my services to watch Monica's children on my days off. Howard took a slow step toward the stairs. He stated that young children require a lot of space, and the current layout of our home was not optimized for daycare duties. He looked back at me over his shoulder. He gestured vaguely toward the second floor. He suggested that my computer room was now wasted real estate. Since I would no longer be playing around with my little projects, he figured that room could serve a much higher purpose for the family. He said it was time to put that square footage to good use. The seed of their next invasion was planted right there in my living room. They were no longer satisfied with dictating my employment and capturing my income. Because they firmly believed I had surrendered my career, they felt entitled to confiscate my physical territory. They were preparing to erase my presence from my own home entirely, setting the stage for a staggering boundary violation that would push our silent war out of the shadows and into the glaring light of day. The physical boundaries of my existence shattered on a Saturday morning. I was sitting at my desk finalizing the logistical layout for our new corporate headquarters when the sound of a heavy engine echoed through the front windows. A large sport utility vehicle parked squarely in my driveway. The doors slammed shut, sending a sharp echo through the quiet suburban street. I did not need to look out the window to know who had arrived. The heavy, synchronized footsteps marching up the front walkway belonged to Howard and Patricia. They did not ring the doorbell. The deadbolt clicked open, and the front door swung wide, admitting a rush of cold autumn air and the loud, unfiltered noise of my in-laws treating my residence like public property. I remained in my leather chair. I listened to their voices echo in the downstairs foyer. They were not carrying bakery boxes or bottles of cheap wine today. I heard the unmistakable sound of flat-packed cardboard hitting the hardwood floor. I heard the sharp, tearing screech of a packing tape dispenser. They were preparing for an eviction. Heavy footsteps ascended the wooden staircase. The door to my home office swung open. Patricia stood on the threshold, holding a stack of flattened moving boxes under her arm. Howard flanked her on the right, clutching a tape measure and a thick black marker. They looked like a demolition crew surveying a condemned building. Patricia did not offer a greeting. She stepped into the room, her eyes sweeping over my monitors, my filing cabinets, and the ergonomic chair I occupied. She announced that since my schedule was changing to accommodate my new role at the dental clinic, this square footage was being reallocated. She declared they were converting my workspace into a dedicated nursery for Monica's children. To Patricia, this room was a monument to my stubborn failure. It was a space where a defiant daughter-in-law played pretend, avoiding the noble, traditional duties of maintaining a household. She viewed my desk as a trivial hobby station that needed to be dismantled and replaced with cribs and changing tables. To me, this room was the incubator of an empire. This was the exact spot where I negotiated my first six-figure contract. This was the sanctuary where I built a logistics network spanning 3 time zones, utilizing nothing but a stable internet connection and relentless discipline. The 4 walls enclosing us held the invisible architecture of a 7-figure enterprise, but Patricia could only see a wasted bedroom. I shifted my gaze from my mother-in-law to the hallway behind her. Evan materialized in the corridor. He did not step into the room to defend my territory. He leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms over his chest. He wore a smug, self-satisfied expression. He told me it made logical sense. He reasoned that Monica's kids needed a quiet place to nap when I watched them during the week, and my little computer setup could easily be moved to a small corner in the basement. He was explicitly endorsing the invasion. He was standing by a willing accomplice, watching his parents dismantle my identity piece by piece. I watched Patricia drop the cardboard boxes onto the carpet. She immediately walked over to my bookshelf and began pulling down industry reference manuals, tossing them haphazardly into a pile. Howard unfolded a box, taped the bottom seams, and approached my secondary desk. Howard reached out with his thick, calloused hands. He picked up a stray, unmarked manila folder resting near my keyboard. He weighed it in his hand, a condescending smirk spreading across his face. He chuckled, a low, grating sound, and held the folder up for his wife to see. He scoffed, calling it my pretend paperwork. He joked that perhaps I had left some coloring pages out for his grandchildren to use. Without waiting for a response, he carelessly tossed the folder into the open cardboard box. It landed with a dull thud, sliding against the cardboard bottom like discarded trash. The profound irony of that moment suspended time. The air in the room grew perfectly still. Howard had no concept of what he had just handled. Inside that unmarked manila folder was an executed vendor contract for a highly specialized pharmaceutical transport route in the Midwest. The signature on the last page guaranteed $2 million in gross revenue over the next 18 months. Howard, a man who spent his entire life taking orders for a modest pension, had just thrown a $2 million legal instrument into a moving box while mocking my work ethic. I did not raise my voice. I did not leap out of my chair to snatch the document from his hands. I moved with slow, deliberate precision. I stood up from my desk. I walked over to the cardboard box. I reached inside, my fingers brushing the cheap corrugated paper, and calmly retrieved the folder. I smoothed a slight crease on the corner, walked back to my desk, and slid the contract into my leather briefcase. I closed my laptop, severing the connection to my servers. I placed the machine into the briefcase beside the contract. I zipped the leather compartment shut, the metal teeth locking together with a satisfying final click. I picked up the bag by its heavy brass handles. I turned to face the 3 people occupying my space. I told them I would work from a local coffee shop for the remainder of the afternoon to stay out of their way. I offered a polite, measured nod. Evan uncrossed his arms. His smirk widened. He stepped aside, clearing a path for me to exit. He firmly believed I was retreating in defeat. He thought his mother had successfully broken my spirit and driven me out of my own sanctuary. Patricia resumed pulling items off my shelves, victorious in her conquest. Howard pulled the tape measure tight across the far wall, already calculating the dimensions for a wooden crib. I walked past Evan, my shoulder brushing his arm, and stepped into the hallway. I descended the staircase, the heavy leather briefcase a reassuring anchor against my side. With each step down the wooden treads, a profound realization settled into my bones. I was not just abandoning a home office. I was not just relinquishing a piece of suburban real estate to a delusional family. At that exact moment, I abandoned the marriage. The emotional tether binding me to the man standing upstairs snapped cleanly in half. There was no grief. There was no lingering attachment. The house around me transformed into a meaningless structure of wood and drywall. I walked out the front door, the autumn wind biting at my cheeks, and climbed into my sensible used sedan. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and left them to play house with their cardboard boxes. I did not drive to a local coffee shop. I navigated toward the interstate, merging into the fast lane, the city skyline looming on the horizon. I drove straight into downtown Philadelphia. I parked in the subterranean garage of my new corporate high-rise and rode the elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened to a symphony of focused, productive chaos. My new headquarters was under active construction. A team of premium contractors moved efficiently through the sprawling 10,000-square-foot space. The air smelled of fresh paint, cut metal, and raw potential. I stood in the center of the floor, watching a specialized crew install custom frosted glass panels along the executive corridor. The heavy panes of glass caught the afternoon sunlight, reflecting a pristine, professional environment. I walked over to the corner suite, the space designated as my primary office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the bustling city below. I placed my leather briefcase on a temporary folding table. I took out the $2 million contract Howard had treated like garbage and rested it flat against the surface. This was the physical manifestation of my power. While my in-laws spent their Saturday fighting over a tiny suburban bedroom to build a nursery, I was orchestrating the construction of an empire in the clouds. The contrast between their petty domestic theft and my corporate expansion was an intoxicating reminder of the silent war I had already won. My cellular phone buzzed inside my pocket. The sharp vibration broke my concentration. I pulled the device out and looked at the illuminated screen. It was a text message from Evan. He demanded I return home immediately. He stated that his parents were working very hard to clear out my junk, and it was my duty to show appreciation. He instructed me to pick up groceries on the way back and prepare a large dinner to thank them for their generous labor. He ended the message by noting that my new dental job would require me to be better at managing my domestic responsibilities, so I needed to start practicing tonight. I read the block of text. I looked up from the screen, my eyes tracing the sleek, modern lines of the frosted glass being mounted into the steel frames across the room. I looked back down at the message from a man who was stealing my income to pay the very mortgage on the house his parents were currently vandalizing. I did not type a reply. I did not invent an excuse about being stuck in traffic. I simply pressed the power button, plunging the screen into darkness, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I ignored his demands entirely. I spent the next 4 hours consulting with the lead architect, finalizing the lighting schematics for the boardroom. I stayed in the city until the sun dipped below the horizon, letting the silence of my absence echo through the halls of that suburban house. My refusal to return home and cook their dinner was a tactical maneuver. It was a deliberate provocation. By ignoring Evan's demands, I was starving his ego, forcing his arrogance to mutate into desperation. As the holidays approached and the weather turned bitter, the family's frustration with my silent defiance would boil over. They were preparing a grand public spectacle for the upcoming Thanksgiving gathering, intending to force my submission in front of an audience. They had no idea they were setting the stage for an ultimatum that would legally hand me the very blade I needed to sever our ties forever. November brought the biting cold of a Pennsylvania winter and the suffocating proximity of the Thanksgiving holiday. The weeks following my quiet departure from the home office had been marked by a tense, vibrating silence. Evan stewed in his own resentment. He could not comprehend my refusal to cook that Saturday evening after his parents invaded my workspace. He interpreted my absence as a childish tantrum rather than a calculated withdrawal. He spent the month alternating between cold shoulder treatments and patronizing lectures, eagerly anticipating the family gathering where he could reassert his dominance in front of an audience. The holiday dinner was hosted at our house. It was a final concession I made to keep the chess pieces moving exactly as I designed. 20 extended relatives packed into my dining and living areas. The air grew thick with the smell of roasted turkey sage stuffing and the overwhelming scent of cheap floral perfume worn by Evan's aunts. The noise level was deafening. I navigated the crowded rooms with the detached grace of a hospitality worker. I filled wine glasses, collected discarded appetizer plates, and observed the guests. They viewed me as the domestic help, the quiet wife who finally learned her place. I viewed them as unwitting extras in the final act of a long, exhausting play. We gathered around the extended dining table. The chatter faded as Patricia stood at the head of the room. She held a crystal wine glass in her right hand and a silver dessert spoon in her left. She tapped the metal against the crystal. The sharp, ringing note cut through the low hum of conversation. 20 faces turned toward her, anticipating her usual blend of praise for Monica and veiled critiques of everyone else. Patricia smoothed her tailored skirt. She offered a wide, practiced smile to the audience. She began by expressing her deep gratitude for family unity and the importance of traditional values. Then she shifted her gaze down the length of the table, locking her eyes onto mine. The maternal warmth drained from her face, replaced by a triumphant gleam. She announced to the gathered crowd that she had a special piece of news to share. She declared, her voice projecting loud enough to reach the far corners of the hallway, that I had finally agreed to step down from my little hobby job. She spun a narrative of a wife seeing the light, stating that by January I would be leaving my fantasy behind to focus on serving my husband and assisting Monica with her childcare needs. She praised Evan for his patience in guiding me toward this mature decision. A murmur of polite approval rippled through the dining room. Several aunts nodded in agreement. Howard raised his glass in silent salute. Beside me, Evan leaned back in his chair. He hooked his thumb into his belt loop, basking in his manufactured dominance. He looked like a conqueror claiming a foreign territory. He believed the public announcement trapped me, assuming I would never dare contradict the family matriarch in front of 20 guests. He was right. I did not contradict her. I did not stand up and scream about the 10,000 square feet of premium downtown real estate currently being outfitted with custom frosted glass for my logistics firm. I did not mention the holding company shielding a 7-figure fortune. I picked up my crystal water goblet. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I met Patricia's triumphant stare with a cool, unblinking gaze. I raised my glass toward the head of the table. I told the room that Patricia was entirely correct. I promised them, my voice steady and clear, that there would definitely be a profound change by January 15th. They applauded. They raised their wine glasses and drank to my submission. They had no concept of the linguistic trap they had just applauded. The dinner concluded. The relatives migrated to the living room to watch football and complain about the economy. I began clearing the heavy porcelain plates, stacking them on the kitchen counter near the industrial sink. The kitchen was empty, save for the rhythmic humming of the dishwasher. I was scraping the remnants of cranberry sauce into the garbage disposal when the swinging door pushed open. Evan stepped into the room. The door swung shut behind him, sealing us in relative quiet. The smug conqueror from the dining table had vanished. In his place stood a frustrated, insecure man. Despite the public victory his mother had orchestrated, my serene reaction unsettled him. My lack of tears or protests unnerved his fragile ego. He needed to extract a tangible, physical submission to feel secure in his scheme. He stepped close, invading my personal space. He crossed his arms and lowered his voice to a harsh whisper, ensuring the guests in the next room could not hear him. He decided to play his final, desperate card. He delivered an ultimatum. He told me the vague promise I made in the dining room was not enough. He demanded concrete action. He instructed me to sign the minimum wage dental receptionist application his mother had printed out. He required me to officially resign from my current position by the 15th of January. He narrowed his eyes, his face inches from mine, and issued his threat. He said if I did not comply with these exact terms, he would file for a legal separation. He looked at me with deep, unfiltered disdain and stated that he needed a real wife, not a girl playing pretend on a computer. He thought he was trapping me in a corner. He believed the threat of divorce would shatter my resolve and force me to beg for his continued presence in my life. He operated under the delusion that his mediocre salary and his patronizing family were the only things keeping me from total ruin. He had no idea he had just handed me the exact legal catalyst I required. By explicitly threatening divorce to coerce my employment choices, he was documenting his own financial and emotional manipulation. He was providing my attorney Oliver with the precise ammunition needed to obliterate any future claims for alimony. Evan was volunteering to dig his own grave, and he was handing me the shovel. I looked at him. I stripped every trace of emotion from my face. I became a blank slate, reflecting nothing but cold calculation. I told him I understood his position perfectly. I agreed to his timeline. I told him that resigning from my current firm involved a complex offboarding process. I suggested that simply sending an email would not suffice. I offered to schedule a formal, in-person meeting with my superior in downtown Philadelphia on the morning of January 15th. I invited him and his parents to accompany me to the corporate office so they could witness the resignation firsthand and ensure I was not bullied into staying. Evan uncrossed his arms. The tension bled out of his shoulders. His ego, starved for validation, seized upon the invitation like a lifeline. The prospect of standing in a corporate office, flanked by his parents acting as the ultimate authority figure, while I resigned from my supposed typing gig, was too enticing for him to resist. He offered a short, curt nod. He told me to set up the meeting and provide him with the address. He turned on his heel and walked back into the living room to join his relatives, confident he had won the silent war. I stood alone by the kitchen sink. I turned on the faucet, letting the warm water wash over my hands. I looked out the window into the dark, freezing suburban night. The trap was not just set. The heavy steel jaws had just locked firmly into place. The path to January 15th was clear, and I was about to introduce my in-laws to a reality they could never possibly comprehend. The morning of January 15th arrived with a bitter, unforgiving freeze. A thick layer of frost coated the suburban lawns, turning the grass into brittle shards of ice. I woke before the sun breached the horizon. I dressed with meticulous care. I selected a tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white blouse, and a pair of dark leather heels. This was not the attire of a defeated typist. This was the armor of a chief executive officer preparing to terminate a hostile acquisition. Evan watched me dress from the doorway of our bedroom. He wore a standard gray suit, the fabric slightly wrinkled at the elbows. He offered a tight, victorious smirk. He told me it was good to see I was taking this resignation meeting seriously. He instructed me to pack up any personal items from my desk today because the new nursery furniture for Monica's children was arriving on Saturday. I offered him a silent, measured nod. I picked up my heavy leather briefcase. I knew I would never sleep in this house again. At 8 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Patricia and Howard stood on the frozen porch, bundled in heavy winter coats. They were practically vibrating with shared triumph. Patricia wore her imitation pearls over a thick wool sweater. Howard gripped a travel mug filled with black coffee. They had come to escort me to the execution. They wanted to witness the exact moment my independence died. We walked out to the driveway and piled into Evan's least luxury sedan. The leather seats were freezing. The heater roared, blowing dry, stale air into the confined cabin. Howard claimed the front passenger seat, acting as the co-pilot for the mission. Patricia sat in the back with me. The physical proximity was stifling. The car smelled of her heavy floral perfume and Howard's stale coffee. The drive into downtown Philadelphia took 45 minutes. During that time, the three of them treated me like a captive audience. They spoke about my future as if I were a wayward teenager, finally submitting to adult supervision. Patricia spent 10 minutes detailing the dress code for the suburban dental clinic. She reminded me to purchase sensible flat shoes, since I would be on my feet filing charts. Howard chimed in with unsolicited professional guidance. He turned around in his seat, looking at me over the headrest. He explained the proper technique for handing in a 2-week notice. He advised me to be firm but polite, warning me not to let my current manager guilt me into staying. He said low-level supervisors often try to bully their contractors into working extra hours. He promised to step in and handle the situation if my boss tried to intimidate me. I looked out the window, watching the frozen landscape blur past the glass. I listened to a man who relied on a fixed pension offer to defend me against a manager who did not exist. I kept my hands resting flat on my leather briefcase. The suburban sprawl gradually yielded to the towering concrete and glass structures of the financial district. Evan navigated the crowded city streets, complaining loudly about the congested traffic and the exorbitant daily parking rates. He pulled the sedan into a subterranean garage beneath a towering skyscraper. The structure was a monolith of reflective glass and dark steel dominating the city skyline. We exited the vehicle. The subterranean air was damp and frigid. We walked toward the elevator bank leading up to the main ground floor. Patricia wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders. She looked at the expensive vehicles parked in the reserved executive spots. She scoffed a dry, dismissive sound. She leaned toward Evan and whispered that my logistics company probably rented a shared janitorial closet in the basement. She assumed this monumental building merely leased out cheap co-working spaces to temporary contractors. She was desperate to minimize the environment, refusing to acknowledge the sheer scale of the architecture surrounding us. We rode the parking elevator up to the street level. The doors opened, depositing us into a cathedral of modern commerce. The stunning marble lobby featured soaring 40-foot ceilings and vast expanses of polished stone. Sleek, minimalist security desks anchored the center of the room. Professionals wearing bespoke tailoring moved purposefully across the gleaming floors. The sheer opulence of the space forced a temporary silence upon my in-laws. They looked momentarily small, displaced from their comfortable suburban hierarchy. But arrogance is a resilient parasite. Howard puffed out his chest, adjusting his collar, attempting to project an unearned sense of belonging. Evan adopted a rigid posture, gripping his cheap briefcase tighter. He marched toward the primary security turnstiles, assuming the role of the protective patriarch guiding his flock. Evan reached into his breast pocket to extract his driver identification. He assumed we needed to sign a visitor log and obtain temporary paper badges to visit a low-level contractor suite. He approached the sleek, curved desk. The tension spiked instantly. The ground floor concierge, a tall man wearing a pristine uniform, was reviewing a digital manifest on his tablet. He glanced up as we approached. His eyes locked onto me. He did not ask for identification. He did not ask for our destination. He immediately stood up from his leather chair. His posture straightened into rigid, undeniable respect. He offered a warm, professional smile. "Good morning, Ms. Hughes," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet marble floor. "Welcome back. We have the express lane ready for you." The concierge stepped out from behind the desk. He held a black metallic radio frequency card in his right hand. He walked directly to the primary glass turnstile, bypassing the visitor registration line entirely. He tapped the black card against the sensory pad. A quiet electronic chime echoed in the air. The heavy glass barriers retracted silently into their housings, opening an exclusive, unhindered path toward the private elevator banks. He gestured politely, holding the lane open for us. Evan froze in his tracks. His hand stopped halfway to his wallet. The driver identification remained stuck in his pocket. He looked at the concierge, then turned his head to stare at me, his brow furrowed in deep, genuine confusion. The mental math was failing him. The narrative he had constructed was rejecting the data his eyes were processing. Expendable data entry workers do not receive personalized greetings. Temporary contractors do not warrant VIP security escorts. Evan's jaw tightened. He stepped through the open turnstile, his confident stride replaced by a hesitant, uneven gait. Patricia followed him, her eyes darting nervously around the cavernous lobby. Howard brought up the rear. He leaned forward, closing the distance between himself and his son. He leaned toward Evan's ear and whispered a loud, desperate theory to explain the unexplainable. He suggested, "I must spend my lunch breaks chatting up the building staff." He claimed, "A friendly smile gets a girl past the front desk anywhere in the city." It was a pathetic, frantic attempt to rationalize a reality that was beginning to fracture right beneath their feet. They needed me to be a friendly subordinate, charming the guards, rather than the owner of the destination they were walking toward. I did not correct Howard. I did not offer an explanation to Evan. I simply walked past the concierge, offering a polite nod of acknowledgement, and led my family toward the executive elevator bank. This specific car required secondary authorization. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner panel mounted on the wall. The sensory ring illuminated a bright, solid green. The heavy brushed steel doors parted with a quiet hiss. We stepped inside the ascending box. The interior was paneled in dark wood and polished metal. There was no generic background music. There was only the low, powerful hum of high-speed cables preparing to pull us upward. The doors slid shut, sealing the four of us inside. The physical sensation of rising to the top floor pressed against the soles of my shoes. I watched the digital floor indicator panel above the door. The numbers climbed with rapid, relentless speed. 10, 20, 30. Evan stared at the same panel. The smug victory he had carried into the car that morning was dissolving, replaced by a creeping, unidentifiable dread. He looked at my calm profile, searching for a sign of nervousness, searching for the submissive wife who was supposed to be trembling before her manager. He found nothing but cold, tranquil certainty. Patricia gripped her handbag with white knuckles. Howard stared at his own reflection in the metal doors. If you have ever bided your time in the shadows, swallowing daily insults while quietly building an impenetrable fortress, you know the exact rhythmic pounding of my heart in that enclosed space. It was not the pulse of fear. It was the drumbeat of pure, earned vindication. The elevator slowed its ascent. The digital numbers stopped climbing. The quiet electronic chime signaled our arrival at the 45th floor. The heavy steel doors slid open. The heavy steel doors parted, retracting with a quiet hiss. Light flooded the enclosed elevator cab. It was not the fluorescent, sterile glow of a shared basement co-working space. It was the radiant, natural sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped around the entire perimeter of the 45th floor. We stepped out of the car and into a sprawling, immaculate reception area. The architecture was sleek and modern, featuring polished concrete floors and warm walnut wood accents. Directly ahead, mounted on a vast expanse of dark slate, a huge brushed metal logo caught the morning light. The precision-cut letters spelled out two words: Viridian Strategies. Patricia stepped out of the elevator first, her sensible flat shoes clicking awkwardly against the polished floor. She halted in her tracks. She looked at the towering ceiling, then at the bustling activity surrounding us. Dozens of professionals moved purposefully through the open concept layout, carrying tablets and reviewing logistics reports. The sheer scale of the operation was breathtaking. It was an environment that projected wealth, authority, and relentless momentum. Patricia blinked her mind frantically, trying to reconcile the opulence of the room with the fictional narrative she had constructed. She still clung to the belief that I was a low-level contractor. She assumed we had simply wandered into the wrong corporate suite. She squared her shoulders, refusing to let the imposing surroundings intimidate her. She clutched her handbag tight against her ribs and marched directly toward the sprawling reception desk. The front desk coordinator, a sharp young woman named Elena, wearing a tailored blazer, looked up from her dual monitors. She offered a polite, welcoming smile. Patricia did not return the courtesy. She adopted her most demanding, authoritative tone. She slapped her palm flat against the marble counter. She announced that she was here to speak with the hiring manager, or whoever was in charge of the data entry contractors. She stated, her voice carrying a sharp edge of suburban entitlement, that she needed to facilitate the immediate termination of Serena Hughes. She added that it was a family matter and required prompt attention. Elena did not flinch. She did not look confused or intimidated by the older woman barking orders at her station. Elena simply shifted her gaze from Patricia, looking past the older woman's shoulder, and locked eyes with me. A knowing, composed smile touched the corners of Elena's mouth. She raised her right hand, extending her index finger, and pointed directly at my chest. Patricia turned around, following the trajectory of the receptionist's finger. She looked at me standing near the elevator bank. I did not say a word. I did not need to correct her. The silence in the reception area grew heavy pregnant with the first undeniable cracks of their shattering delusion. I adjusted my grip on my leather briefcase. I bypassed the reception desk entirely and began walking down the primary corridor. I did not look back to see if they were following. I knew the sheer gravitational pull of the unknown would drag them along. I heard their uneven footsteps trailing behind me on the polished concrete. We walked down a long hallway flanked by transparent glass offices. The transparency was intentional, designed to foster a culture of open communication, but today it served a much more tactical purpose. It provided my in-laws with an unobstructed view of my domain. As we passed each suite, senior directors and logistics analysts looked up from their workstations. They did not ignore me. They did not treat me like domestic help. They stood up. They offered respectful nods. A vice president of operations paused his presentation to offer a brief, deferential wave. I could hear Evan's breathing grow shallow and erratic. I caught his reflection in the transparent panels as we walked. His face was draining of all color, fading into a sickly shade of ash. The arrogant conqueror who had threatened me with divorce in our kitchen the night before was evaporating. He was realizing that the woman he demanded obedience from was the reigning monarch of a high-altitude corporate ecosystem. Howard walked beside him in stunned silence. The man who had lectured me with a plastic calculator and a yellow notepad was now shrinking under the weight of his own profound ignorance. We reached the end of the corridor. The hallway terminated at a sprawling corner suite. The walls were constructed of floor-to-ceiling panes, offering a dizzying panoramic view of the Philadelphia skyline. The door to the suite was a thick, heavy slab of frosted glass. Etched deeply into the center of the frosted panel, in elegant, unmistakable typography, were 6 words that permanently altered the trajectory of their lives. Serena Hughes, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Patricia stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at the etching. Her eyes widened, tracing the letters over and over again, searching for a typo, searching for a misunderstanding, searching for any possible loophole that would allow her to maintain her superiority. There was none. The glass offered only cold, hard facts. I reached out, wrapped my hand around the brushed metal handle, and pulled the heavy door open. I stepped into my office. The space was pristine. A sleek modern sofa sat near the window. A vast mahogany desk anchored the center of the room, polished to a high sheen. I walked around the desk, set my leather briefcase down, and took my seat in the high-backed leather executive chair. Evan, Patricia, and Howard stepped hesitantly into the room. They looked like trespassers who had wandered into a restricted vault. They stood awkwardly on the plush carpet. I did not offer them a seat. I let them stand. I let the physical power dynamic dictate the terms of the engagement. I sat elevated and secure while they stood vulnerable and exposed. I folded my hands on top of the mahogany surface. I initiated a countdown in my head. I let 10 full seconds of suffocating silence tick by. The quiet was heavy enough to crush bone. The only sound in the room was the faint, distant hum of the city traffic far below us. I watched their minds short-circuit. I watched years of condescension, mockery, and unearned pride curdle into raw, unfiltered panic. Patricia broke the silence. Her voice, usually so commanding and sharp, trembled. It was a thin, fragile sound. She gestured wildly toward the doorway, then toward the mahogany desk, her hands shaking. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking on the final syllable. I looked at her. I drew upon the exact vocal cadence I utilize when dissecting a flawed vendor contract. It was a tone devoid of anger, devoid of pity, and stripped of all emotional vulnerability. It was the sound of inevitable truth. "You wanted to meet my boss," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "You are looking at her." Evan let out a strangled, breathless gasp. He took a stumbling step backward, his shoulder colliding with the glass wall. The reality of his situation crashed into him with the force of a falling anvil. He had spent years trying to control a woman whose financial footprint could erase his entire existence with a single wire transfer. But the grand reveal was only the first part of the execution. I needed to return the heavy boulder of disrespect they had hurled at me months prior. I needed to fire the loaded weapon I had stored in the dark for this exact occasion. I broke eye contact with Patricia. I reached down and pulled open the top drawer of my mahogany desk. The drawer slid out on silent ball bearings. I reached inside and retrieved a piece of cheap, folded printer paper. It was the exact minimum wage dental receptionist application Patricia had filled out in blue ink and left on my home keyboard. I lifted the paper. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases flat. I placed it on the polished wood of my desk. With a flick of my wrist, I slid the application across the smooth mahogany surface. The paper glided silently, coming to a rest exactly 2 inches from Patricia's trembling fingers. I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked the woman who had tried to turn me into an unpaid servant directly in the eye. "We are hiring for the front desk, Patricia," I told her, my voice echoing cleanly in the spacious suite. "If you are looking for work..." The reversal of power was instantaneous and total. The woman who had treated my career like a trivial game was now staring at a discarded entry-level application delivered to her by a chief executive officer. But Evan was not going to accept his demotion quietly. As the shock wore off, his desperation mutated into a frantic, greedy calculation. He was about to try and claim this empire as his own, setting the stage for the final legal trap to snap shut around his neck. The shock paralyzing the room began to mutate. I watched the transformation happen in real time across Evan's face. The pale, ashen color of profound humiliation slowly faded, replaced by a flushed, feverish pink. His eyes darted away from my face and began to rapidly catalog the environment. He looked at the custom lighting fixtures. He calculated the square footage of the corner suite. He stared through the glass walls at the dozens of highly paid professionals working on the open floor. The arithmetic was clicking together in his mind. The sheer financial magnitude of the operation overrode his bruised ego. A parasitic hunger replaced his initial terror. He took a step forward, leaving his parents standing near the doorway. He approached the edge of my sprawling mahogany desk. He gripped the polished wooden rim with both hands. His knuckles turned white from the pressure. He leaned toward me, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate greed. "We own this," he stammered, his voice rising in pitch. He did not ask if I owned it. He used the plural pronoun. In his desperate mind, he was already attempting to claim half of my empire. He was trying to rewrite the narrative on the spot, positioning himself as the rightful co-founder and equal partner in a wealth he had only discovered 3 minutes ago. He thought the legal bonds of our marriage automatically entitled him to the keys to the kingdom. I did not laugh. I maintained a steady, unblinking gaze. I reached down to the lower drawer of my desk. I pulled the heavy brass handle and retrieved a thick, dark blue folder embossed with the logo of Oliver's law firm. I placed the dense stack of legal documents onto the desk. I pushed the folder forward, letting it slide smoothly across the wood until it rested directly beneath Evan's white knuckles. I advised him to open it. He released his grip on the desk edge with one hand and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. The first page displayed the official articles of incorporation for Hughes Holdings Limited Liability Company. It listed my name as the sole managing member and exclusive shareholder. I began to explain the architecture of his ruin in clinical, precise detail. I kept my voice level, delivering the facts with the detached cadence of an auditor reading a balance sheet. I reminded him of the first year of our marriage. I recounted his intense obsession with his $90,000 student loan debt. I recalled the evening he sat me down in our first apartment, demanding we file our taxes separately and draft a rigid post-nuptial agreement. He had insisted on drawing a permanent legal boundary between our assets to protect his paper supply salary from the potential failure of my struggling software startup. I watched his eyes scan the dense legal paragraphs. I explained that because he had legally demanded that stringent financial segregation, my business remained my exclusive property. He had built a fortress to keep me out of his meager savings account. I simply used those exact same bricks to wall him out of a 7-figure enterprise. I detailed how every share of Viridian Strategies had been seamlessly transferred into the holding company weeks ago, shielding every penny from his reach. The dramatic irony hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered back half a step, the air rushed out of his lungs. He realized the $4,000 monthly transfer to the joint checking account was not my maximum earning potential. It was a microscopic fraction of my net worth. He realized I had been paying the mortgage on his suburban house with pocket change, letting him pretend to be the wealthy patriarch, while he secretly drained his own accounts to fund Monica's credit card debt. He was financially insolvent, and the vast fortune sitting right in front of him was legally untouchable. Patricia watched her son falter. She recognized the total collapse of their leverage. When a narcissist loses control of a situation, they inevitably pivot to the role of the victim. If she could not command obedience, she would seek to destroy my reputation. The manufactured tears began to fall. Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a stream of crying that sounded thin and theatrical. She took a step toward the desk, pointing a trembling manicured finger at my face. Her voice cracked with fabricated sorrow. She outlined her counterattack. She threatened to call every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family the moment she returned to the suburbs. She promised to spin a narrative of my supposed cruelty. She declared she would tell everyone I had lured them into the city under false pretenses, just to scream at them and humiliate them. She planned to paint me as an unhinged, abusive tyrant who had lost her mind and destroyed a loving family out of pure spite. She believed the threat of social exile and family gossip would force me to apologize and surrender. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice to defend my character against her fictional script. I simply lifted my right hand and pointed a single index finger toward the upper corner of the executive suite. Mounted flush against the ceiling tiles was a small, sleek dome camera. A tiny red indicator light blinked in a steady, rhythmic pulse. Patricia stopped crying mid-sob. Her trembling finger lowered slowly to her side. I explained the technical specifications of the security system. I informed her the camera recorded in 4,000 pixel resolution. I noted the omnidirectional microphone captured audio with flawless clarity. I told her the footage was currently streaming directly to a secure off-site cloud server. I explained that every single word she had spoken, every manufactured tear she had shed, and every threat she had just issued was digitally preserved. If she attempted to spread a false narrative to the extended family, I would simply email the raw video file to every contact in her phone book. The gossip weapon she had relied on for decades was disarmed in a matter of seconds. Patricia closed her mouth. The fake tears dried instantly on her cheeks. She was trapped in a room where her lies carried no currency. I lowered my hand. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the mahogany desk. I shifted my focus from Patricia back to Evan. I delivered my final directive. I stated they had 60 seconds to vacate my corporate property. If they remained in the suite after the timer expired, I would instruct building security to physically escort them out of the lobby for trespassing. I reached out and pressed a button on my desk phone, illuminating the direct line to the ground floor concierge. The visual threat was undeniable. The countdown had officially commenced. The facade of the stoic, controlling patriarch crumbled into pathetic desperation. Evan broke. His knees buckled slightly. He lunged forward, gripping the edge of the desk again, his knuckles whiter than before. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the pleading, panicked tone of a man watching his entire life disintegrate. He begged me to stop. He pleaded for us to leave the office, go back to the suburbs, sit in our kitchen, and talk through the situation. He suggested we could attend marital counseling. He used the word team for the first time in our entire relationship, claiming we could figure out a path forward together. He promised he would stop pressuring me about Monica's childcare needs. He promised things would change. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers brushed against cold brass. I extracted the key to the suburban house we had shared. I held the key suspended over the desk for a brief moment. Then I opened my fingers. The heavy brass dropped onto the polished mahogany wood. The metal clattered loudly, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. I told him I was never returning to that house. I kept my voice devoid of pity. I informed him that my attorney had just transmitted the official divorce filings to his personal email inbox 10 minutes prior. I reminded him of the ultimatum he had issued in our kitchen on Thanksgiving night. He had explicitly threatened to file for separation if I did not quit my job and submit to his demands. I explained that the divorce papers cited his own documented emotional coercion and financial manipulation as the primary catalyst for the dissolution of the marriage. He had demanded a separation, and I was legally obliging his request. Evan stared at the brass house key resting on the desk. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His breathing was rapid and shallow. I delivered the final piece of information. I told him he could return to the suburbs and help his parents build their nursery in my old bedroom. I did not need the space anymore. I informed him my new residential address was a penthouse suite located exactly 5 blocks away from this office building. The reversal of power was absolute. The man who had tried to force me into a minimum wage existence was now facing a mountain of debt, a pending divorce, and the undeniable reality of his own staggering insignificance. The 60-second timer in my head expired. I picked up the desk phone receiver, maintaining direct eye contact with the 3 silent figures standing in my office, and waited for them to make their final choice. I held the receiver of the desk phone near my ear. The dial tone hummed a flat, continuous note. Evan stared at the brass key resting on the mahogany. He realized the bluff was over. There was no negotiation left to pursue. He turned around, his shoulders slumped forward, the manufactured posture of a patriarch broken beyond repair. He walked out of the executive suite. Patricia and Howard followed him in silent, shuffling steps. They looked like ghosts banished from the physical realm, stripped of their power and exposed to the cold light of reality. The heavy frosted glass door clicked shut behind them. I replaced the receiver on its cradle. The silence that settled over my office was pristine. It was the sound of a long, exhausting war finally concluding. The legal fallout arrived with swift, surgical precision. Evan retained a low-tier divorce attorney from the suburbs. This was a man who built a local practice on intimidating spouses into lopsided settlements. Within 48 hours, this attorney filed a motion in the county court demanding permanent spousal support. He argued that Evan had grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle and required a monthly stipend to maintain his standard of living. He sought to tap into the revenue of Viridian Strategies, claiming the business was marital property, despite the post-nuptial agreement we signed years ago. He sent a thick packet of demands to my legal counsel, anticipating a protracted, expensive negotiation. Oliver did not negotiate. Oliver responded with a single, heavily encrypted digital file sent directly to opposing counsel. Inside that digital file was a comprehensive archive documenting their staggering arrogance. Oliver included the high-resolution photographs of Evan's banking screens. Those images detailed the secret outward transfers to Monica and the subsequent mortgage payments funded directly by my decoy deposits. He included the audio recordings of Howard patronizing my intelligence. He provided the digital copies of Patricia, threatening to weaponize family gossip in my office. He attached the screenshots of the group chat where they openly conspired to force my resignation and turn me into an unpaid domestic servant. The final piece of evidence was the unedited digital record of Evan's text messages and his verbal ultimatum on Thanksgiving night. In those messages, he explicitly threatened to file for separation if I did not abandon my career. Oliver drafted a concise cover letter, pointing out a fundamental legal reality in the state of Pennsylvania. A spouse cannot successfully claim alimony when they are the primary documented catalyst for the dissolution of the marriage. This is especially true when they utilize threats of divorce as a calculated tool for emotional and financial coercion. Furthermore, the postnuptial agreement Evan had demanded during our first year of marriage held firm. The holding company was a pristine, impenetrable fortress. Evan had locked himself out of my wealth years ago, and his recent behavior nullified any remaining claims to spousal support. Evan's attorney reviewed the digital evidence and immediately withdrew the motion for alimony. The legal bluster evaporated overnight. The lawyer advised his client to accept a clean, uncontested separation before I filed devastating counterclaims for the misappropriation of shared funds. Evan signed the dissolution papers a week later. The financial reality of his situation set in shortly after the ink dried on the legal documents. Without my monthly stipend to cover his exorbitant expenses, his fragile house of cards collapsed. He had drained his personal savings to fund his sister's luxury lifestyle. He could not afford the monthly mortgage payments on his mediocre corporate salary. The bank initiated standard foreclosure proceedings within 60 days. He was forced to break the lease on his luxury sedan, paying a steep penalty he could not afford. He surrendered the keys to the suburban home we once shared. The nursery Patricia and Howard had so eagerly prepared in my former home office was dismantled before a single coat of paint ever dried. Evan packed his remaining personal possessions into cheap cardboard boxes. He drove back to his parents' house, he carried his boxes up the stairs, and moved into his childhood bedroom. A 30-something man who had spent years demanding submission and ultimate authority was now sleeping down the hall from his mother. He was trapped in a suburban purgatory of his own making, surrounded by the exact enablers who helped orchestrate his downfall. A year passed. The bitter winter thawed into spring, followed by a warm, productive summer. Viridian Strategies doubled its regional footprint, securing high-yield logistics contracts across the entire eastern seaboard. I was no longer navigating the stifling tension of a toxic household. I was sitting on a soft leather sofa in my new penthouse, looking out through floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Philadelphia skyline. The city lights glittered against the dark night sky, forming a vibrant, endless grid of potential. My environment reflected the deep, quiet peace I had secured. The poetic justice of the situation arrived on a Tuesday evening. My cellular phone chimed on the glass coffee table. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message from an unsaved phone number. I recognized the digits immediately. It was Monica. Her corporate fairy tale had encountered a harsh reality. The mid-sized advertising agency she worked for had experienced a severe budget shortfall. The marketing department, deemed a non-essential cost center by the executive board, faced drastic restructuring. Monica was laid off. Her trivial title bump and her glossy corporate business cards could not save her from the chopping block. The text message was a long, rambling paragraph. She did not offer an apology for her past behavior at the family dinners. She did not express remorse for participating in the group chat that plotted my domestic servitude. Instead, she adopted a tone of desperate, unearned familiarity. She wrote that she knew I had some valuable connections in the corporate world now. She asked if I could leverage my professional network to secure her a job interview. The golden child, the woman who had smirked into her wine glass while her mother called me a worthless data entry assistant, was now begging that same assistant for a career recommendation. I read the block of text glowing on the small screen. I searched my mind for a trace of vindictive joy or lingering resentment. I found nothing. I felt only a vast, serene indifference. She was a stranger, reaching out from a past I had already discarded. I did not type a response. I did not point out the profound hypocrisy of her request. I simply swiped my finger across the smooth glass, selected the delete option, and erased her from my digital life. I set the phone back on the coffee table and picked up my cup of tea. I stood up and walked over to the gallery wall near my home workspace. The wall featured various industry accolades, logistics awards, and the official state recognition of my corporate incorporation. But the centerpiece of the collection was not a polished silver trophy or a brass plaque. Hanging directly at eye level, encased in a sleek, minimalist black frame, was a piece of cheap printer paper. It was the minimum wage dental receptionist application Patricia had filled out in her looping blue handwriting. I kept it there as a daily anchor. It serves as a permanent, physical reminder of the dark basement they tried to keep me in. It represents the tiny, suffocating box they built and expected me to inhabit. Whenever I review a dense contract or negotiate a complex corporate merger, I look at that blue ink. It grounds me. It reminds me that my freedom was not granted by anyone. It was engineered. It was fought for in the quiet margins of a life they refused to respect. They demanded a proper wife. They wanted a subordinate entity who would shrink her ambitions to fit their fragile egos. I chose a different path. I became a proper chief executive officer. I built an empire with the very hands they deemed useless. They do not get a key to this life. They do not get a seat at this table. If you know what it feels like to break out of a cage, a toxic family built for you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me your story in the comments section below. I read every single one.